I think in days of agentic AI, owning production of complex outputs is going to be the number one skill. It's going to be sort of serving as the project manager of a fleet of agentic AIs instead of a fleet of team members. Higher ed was a necessary requisite part of my talent pipeline. It was producing a ton of false positives and negatives. How can we bring that earn and learn model and that blending of apprenticeship with degree together?
Welcome to another episode of Relearning Work, where we dive into the future of learning at work. In each episode, we bring you conversations with leaders from industry and education to challenge the assumptions, propose ideas, and share learnings as we all navigate this world that is being reshaped by agentic AI. Now, whether you're an educator, a student, or a business executive looking to stay ahead in this rapidly changing landscape, there's something here for you. I'm your host, David Yip. My guest today is Dr. Mallory Dwinal-Palisch, educator, Rhodes Scholar, education entrepreneur, and changemaker. Mallory began her career as a teacher before co-founding Oscar Day Academy, an experiential learning charter school in California. Her hands-on experience watching students thrive in a real-world learning environment inspired her to co-found Reach University, the first regionally accredited university in the US to offer apprenticeship-based associate, bachelor's, and master's degrees, with a particular focus on training teachers. Providing academic credit for on-the-job experience, Reach University is breaking down barriers to building teacher talent pipelines and addressing a critical skill shortage. She also co-founded a venture-backed EdTech, Kraft Education Systems, which was later acquired by Western Governors University last year, where she is now looking to replicate and scale Reach's groundbreaking apprenticeship-based degree model across the US. Mallory represents a new generation of education trailblazers who are rethinking traditional learn-to-earn pathways and demonstrating how universities can scale impact through technology and new business models to better serve the workforce and communities. Welcome to the show, Mallory.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
That's quite a background. You've done, you've created not just one, but a number of ventures, including a university. Can you give us a bit of a background, how you got here?
It has been a winding road. So to be as concise as I know how to be, I think the big theme of how we got here was being sticky and passionate about solving the problem as opposed to holding on to what the solution is. And each solution along the way has been the right solution and one that is still thriving today. But as we would start to solve one piece of the problem, which I'll get to in a second, a new facet would emerge that would also, for the problem to be addressed, need to be tackled head on. And that would lead to the next chapter. And so for me, that started as a researcher. I started as a PhD student doing my PhD in teacher labor economics, so modeling quantitatively how teacher shortages are shaped in rural markets, how they respond to interventions, particularly like Teach for America in the United States. And then as I started to do that work, I became passionate about this idea that if we were ever going to solve a problem, this labor market problem, at the macro level, we needed a way more fluid training system that was much more attuned to local disaggregated supply and demand mismatch, and that our centralized school university system was just not built to do that. So that was a very boring, dry, technocratic thesis that I had about 15 years ago. And everything since has been pulling on different threads of that. So it started with becoming a classroom teacher, and then starting a high school that focused on developing our own local teacher supply. As we would work on developing our own local teachers that reflected our student body, that met our particular student teaching needs, we would see that we had those talented individuals working in our classroom every day. This was at Oxford Day Academy, but we couldn't turn them into teachers without a college degree. And those individuals kept falling out of the teacher training university pipeline for things that had nothing to do with desire or ability, right? It was the time of day classes were offered. It was transportation. It was childcare. And so that led to us starting Reach University, which is an amazing institution still operating today that does one thing and one thing only, And that is offering apprenticeship-based teaching degrees. So people working in classrooms as dedicated aides or whatever role they already have in their school system, and turning that into an apprenticeship that confers college credits and then culminates in a college degree and teaching credential. As we started doing that at Reach, one of the challenges that we saw was that we were now reporting up to 2 masters. As an accredited university, we were responsible to the U.S. Department of Education and our accreditors and everything on the education side of the house from a regulatory perspective. But then we were also a registered apprenticeship, which meant that now we were also responsible to reporting to a second government bureaucracy in the U.S. Department of Labor. They cared about the same thing, but completely different workforce systems, completely different reporting systems, completely different cadences. And we were spending so much time just trying to figure out how to send the same information to 2 regulatory systems. And so that led to the creation of Kraft, which is where I still am today. Kraft started as a tool just for Reach, but as we saw teacher apprenticeships take off, where today there are about 48 states in the United States that have teaching apprenticeships, and they are serving thousands of students across about 1,600 different registered teaching apprenticeship programs. And all of those programs were reporting the same problem, right? A teacher training program that is accountable to both the Department of Ed and the Department of Labor. So Kraft ultimately spun out originally as a venture capital backed entity, but as we saw the need for this to really operate as a public data utility, fell back into the systems that I'm most familiar and comfortable with, which is the nonprofit world. And this last fall, Western Governors University acquired Kraft to turn it into a nonprofit public data utility that serves any training provider, not just in teaching, but in any pathway that is interested in braiding together high school career and technical education with higher education, with workforce, to build stackable apprenticeship pathways into any industry in America.
That is a big ambition as well for any industry. But actually dovetails perfectly into, I guess, why I created this podcast and why I'm calling it Relearning Work, right? Because agentic AI, we can't, turn up to any event without mentioning the word AI these days. But I think it is such a pervasive and such a disruptive technology. We have to think about it quite carefully, because we have to rethink. And in this case, I think we have to relearn what we actually do for our careers. And education is core to that, and can't do this at scale without data, right?
That's right. And I think that unless we dramatically rethink our training structures in terms of both how we braid together experiences, so we also have to stop siloing experiences between high school, workforce, and higher education. But also within each of those, if we don't embrace what agentic AI is and train our learners to be owners and leaders of that, they will absolutely get pushed out of the labor market. We will not have an opportunity for these individuals to find first jobs, because agentic AI will those jobs.
One thing I do explore with all my guests is, because this agentic AI, I guess disruption, if you want to call it, it requires us to be in the right mindset to see the opportunities. But in order to do that, we have to really understand some of the assumptions that we're making day to day. Some assumptions we may not be aware of, some assumptions we be aware of, but we have to be aware of these assumptions to get into the right mindset to see the opportunities in front of us. What do you think as perhaps assumptions that we might be making that we might not even be aware of, that's perhaps creating blind spots or not seeing opportunities?
I think the single biggest assumption that we as educators are making that is a dangerous assumption is that learners using AI is cheating. And it might be an extreme position, but I don't think there should be any situation where a learner being able to use AI in certain circumstances, like there's a way for them to use it in the course of what you've asked them to do, that we should be calling that cheating. And shocking to me, because I'll open up newspapers and see, articles about how it's estimated that over half of students are quote unquote cheating using things like ChatGPT in their assignments, and how institutions are having to bring back blue books for exams because there was the only way to control for students cheating on their exams. And that's such a dangerous assumption, and it's not a rare one. I think in the most recent report from the Inside Higher Ed, as a reporter in this space, is that in the US, over half of institutions' faculty members ban the use of AI in their classes. And that is such a dangerous approach, and it betrays an assumption about what learning is, around what
Mm,
knowledge is. And I think
mm.
it's something that we have to tackle as an assumption, and hit it out and root it out, and ensure that we address it head on.
That's so true. What actually is education, right? What assumption are we making when we're going about being educators or, running the system, so to speak? And I think one of the things that we spoke about in a previous show about, the education system, for as long as I can remember, has been set up to impart knowledge I guess providing students with a way to provide to solve problems, to provide answers, right? But now, even before with Google, it's pretty easy to find answers. Just Google it, right? Now with AI, it's even easier. So finding answers or finding solutions is no longer, I think, shouldn't be the emphasis anymore. The education system should actually be geared towards helping students ask questions, not helping students find answers. Because when you ask the right question, then you can find the answers. And we're provided with the answers all the time. The problem actually is not finding the answers; it's actually understanding those answers we're getting. Are they correct? Are they not correct? Are they not complete? We have to. The only way we can do that is by knowing how to ask questions, and is that harder than it sounds, right?
And then on the other side, being held accountable for gauging whether or not the answers are the right ones, right? So I think about my
Yeah.
job all the time, and I'm constantly using AI to do two things. One is to produce content on things that I already know. So I can insert facts and figures on something and tell AI to produce a one pager or an executive summary, or
Mm,
something that would have previously taken me hours of my own time, or it would have been something that I would have hired an intern or a first out of
mm, mm,
college job individual to complete. And now I
mm,
can just do on my own. So that's, again, should
mm,
be its own red flag of, I'm using it instead of going and hiring individuals for their
mm,
first job here. But then the second thing I'm doing with it is using it to research new fields and topics. And AI is not sentient. And in fact, the
mm,
research released this year, within around May, suggests that it's not actually even doing any of the reasoning that we think it's doing, even in our reasoning models. These are
mm,
systems that are fraught with disinformation that is being fed into their primary systems, that is prone to hallucinations, even when it's not ingesting misinformation. And so the second piece of my relationship to AI in my everyday life is the ability to not just ask it questions, but to suss out and to
mm,
verify the validity of its answers. And
mm,
by
mm,
trying to keep learners away from that, as opposed to making
mm.
them responsible for whatever they produce through AI, I think we do them a massive disservice.
Yeah. And now, even just that in and of itself, asking questions of the answers that you're getting to see if they're true or not. Um, I guess you and I can do that because we've got, I guess, a body of knowledge, a body of experience, life experience, work experience that we can actually, know what questions to ask, right? So you mentioned before you might get an intern to do some work, but you do it yourself. I think that's something which we have to be very careful of because AI, I think, will actually disproportionately make the professionals, the experts, more productive, right? So it takes the first couple of rungs out of the career ladder. So if the early career people now are struggling to get experience, how can they actually know how to use AI properly, even if they know the answers they're getting might not be complete or even correct even, but how do they know what questions to ask if they haven't had that lived experience?
And this is where I think institutions need to come in and shift away from trying to keep learners from engaging with AI to
Yeah.
actually raising the stakes of what we're asking them to produce. Ask them to produce things that would never have been reasonable before, for a
Mm,
learner at that level without AI. And now hold them
mm,
accountable for what that final product is, for its validity, right? So I think about,
mm,
people often talk about engineers, right? And senior engineers
mm,
don't have need for many of these entry level junior engineers anymore, because they can just have AI produce code bases that they might tweak here and there, but they don't have to
mm,
have someone else go and do that manual development of it. Well, why aren't we in our computer science classes teaching students to do that same thing, right? I feel like we're doing the equivalent of when typing first became a possibility in schools, so many people lamented that children were no longer going to learn cursive. Why do we need cursive in the day
Yeah.
of typing? I use cursive. Similarly, why are we lamenting this idea that young students in coding will never know how to build code from scratch? Why should they? Why should they be doing that if their productivity needs to be so much higher to have any value in those entry level roles, right? Why are we not asking them to produce much more sophisticated work products in their assessments in which they need AI to produce pieces of it, and they are taking responsibility for checking the code, for fixing the bugs, for turning that into something more sophisticated so that they can still add value in that first job? And I think we have lost the thread as an institution of higher ed, maybe because we as instructors don't feel comfortable in how to teach it. We ourselves are learning how to use these tools, but we have to address that head on, because trying to keep it back from students instead of teaching them how to use it just means that we are further contributing to that gap between where they enter the workforce and how many rungs up they need to be before they add value to an employer.
So is that really fundamentally asking the teachers to rethink their role? What they actually teach? If I'm I don't know, a history teacher, am I actually teaching history, or am I actually teaching something else? And the students are learning history and coming to the classroom, and I'm doing something else with them.
I completely think it's the latter. And so, and even, a lot of times I will hear the pushback of, well, all of education isn't about workforce skills, right? There's a need for liberal arts, and people point to things like history and English. And I don't disagree. But my argument would be, even so, let's talk about what the role of history is. Every day right now, we see more and more citizens, global citizenry, anywhere in the world, struggling with questions around truth, around misinformation, around history versus like factual history versus theories of history. And we are not equipping people in an age where it is so easy to produce millions of words instantaneously that evidentiate something that's actually not true. How are we teaching people to go through and engage with historical texts and documents, to engage with statements about what happened or what didn't, and to assess whether that's the equivalent of a human hallucination or misinformation or not? And so even in subjects that are not about producing immediate workplace skills, which I think we under index on in education in general, but even in the places where we still think that those liberal arts capacities are unto themselves the point, how are we not preparing our students when it comes to history and social studies and English and the humanities to be engaging with what that looks like in our modern digital context?
Yeah, and so much more than teaching the like historical content and memorizing facts and dates and things like that, but the flipped classroom concept: get the students to learn something and then come to class, discuss it, and have the teacher ask questions and show students how to ask questions to ask. Right. You might read something which sounds pretty complete and legitimate, but it takes someone with lived experience who's got that very, very life experience to go and impart that question asking skill to the students.
That's right.
And I think that's going to be super valuable. What other skills do you think maybe under-indexed, but that should be over-indexed in now our agentic AI world?
I think in days of agentic AI, owning production of complex outputs is going to be the number one skill. It's going to be sort of serving as the project manager of a fleet of agentic AIs instead of a fleet of team members. So there is an expectation in today's society that you be able to produce with things like agentic AI what previously would have taken 10 people months to produce, that you can now produce in 1 week by yourself. And that requires a sophistication in understanding what agentic AI can do and what it can't, how you integrate those systems, right? How it's interacting with the systems you're asking that agent to act upon, how it's interacting with one another, and what is the architecture of the overall project you're building such that the outputs of each of those different agents is building what it is you needed. That's the first skill that I think is desperately for this day and age. The second piece I do think comes back to information and misinformation. You can only build something for a market if you feel confident that you understand the market. And one of the things that has shifted radically in our time is how people consume information. People are just as likely to take in their understanding of their worldview through podcasts and through third-party independent people that are sharing their views as they are from vetted, centralized, standardized media. Oftentimes people don't even trust centralized, standardized media. Data gets swirled around so fast that it brings back the Twain quote of there's lies, damned lies, and statistics. And so to build that project in the first place, you have to first feel an assurity that you have some grasp on, is the market that you're trying to tackle real? Is the problem that you're trying to tackle real? How do you know? What's the feedback you're getting that your assumptions are holding true? Especially when information has been more voluminous, but also never been more ephemeral and flexible and just outright wrong. And so how are we developing skills in people to first understand the world they're in, and then to project manage a fleet of agentic AI operators to build a complex product that responds to that world order?
And interesting, you talk about a fleet of agentic AI operators. I think people are just starting to really even grasp just one, but it is what really I think talking about there is they're happening at a different scale, right? Different scale and different complexity. And you need to be able to manage that, to be able to work with that. Maybe it's not just agentic AIs, but also AIs plus humans, and you're managing people and technology, and you need to be fluid between the two. And that through time. It kind of point to, and you spend a fair bit of time really developing more of this degree apprenticeship model. Does sound like we're going back into the old apprenticeship way of learning.
Yes. I will say, I think we had a false binary pop up over the course of the last 150 years or so of separating higher education in that liberal arts tradition from experiential learning that we've now classified as being non-liberal arts, not teaching higher order thinking, and being much more about internalizing rote skills. That was a false binary that was created and then got calcified in the Western training system about 150 years ago. And when we look at it, this started for me not because of any particular love of higher education, but out of this area of where I was focusing my attention was on teaching. For good reason that I actually fully support. We expect teachers to have college degrees. Same thing with nurses, same thing with social workers. There are certain professions that we will not anytime soon be giving up the need for a college degree to hold that position. And I know two things are true as someone who's been a school principal hiring for that role. One, I would have a ton of what I would call false negatives. So people who I couldn't hire, who I knew would be great teachers today. They'd been working in classrooms for 20 years. They could teach the content inside and out, but they'd only been ever doing that as a classroom aide because they didn't have a college degree. So I had false negatives on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, I'd had a bunch of what I'd call false positives. People coming out of college with all of the paper that they needed, all of the certifications, none of them ready to teach. And some of them never were going to be ready to teach, right? They did all the courses, but they had never had the experience to know, what am I really signing up for? What really is the teaching profession? And do I have what it takes to do this day in, day out? And so while higher ed was a necessary requisite part of my talent pipeline, it was producing a ton of false positives and negatives. So for me, the idea of braiding together degrees and apprenticeships went back to first that philosophical origin of these two things were not originally meant to be kept isolated from one another. And second of all, the fact that I don't want them to be. I'm seeing a ton of loss and a ton of noise in the system. So how can we bring, for my very particular industry of teaching, how can we bring that earn and learn model and that blending of apprenticeship with degree together. And that's where we started. But what we saw pretty quickly along the way was that this isn't just for teaching, right? So professions like nursing and social work also had a ton to benefit from it. And what we also saw is that, in many professions, it was already there. And the most common example is medical school. You cannot be a doctor without going through, after your training, a residency, which is basically the apprenticeship component of a degree pathway. And so as we drew from those best practices, both in that present setting and what we saw historically, we realized this is really just a versatile way of training people in any place where we want them to have that blend of cutting edge practical skill combined with underlying theoretical knowledge that informs their ability to make decisions, to adapt, and to generally manage complex situations.
Yeah, and way to do that is to be an apprentice, to follow someone, to really practice what you learn straight away in a real setting, not an artificial setting, and pick up that skill over repetition. And you mentioned, teaching, social work, and health. But I think it equally applies in cutting edge industries like tech and software. And I've been a technologist up in the tech industry now for over 20 odd years. And yes, the technology is always new and cutting edge, but some of the problems that we're tackling, a lot of it goes down to people and process. And to make a technology project successful, you really have to understand that. It's not just about applying the latest and greatest. It has to fit the context. And that you pick up over time. That's with right. Experience. And I think even with such a cutting edge technology where people say, well, the skills probably only last for a couple of years before you need to learn a new language or a new tech stack. But you really need to spend time to perfect the understanding how people work. Right?
That's right.
And that's an apprenticeship model.
And say, I think my bias is apprenticeship. I think every single profession can have apprenticeship pathways within it and should have apprenticeship pathways within it. I don't think that every single profession needs degree pathways within it. And in fact, I think one of the big challenges, particularly in the United States, but I think this is a global problem, has been this creep towards turning every skilled profession into something that now requires an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, and it adds cost onto the learner, and it without necessarily adding value in terms of what that learner can do. There are so many situations where a really great apprenticeship can teach you everything you need to know about a job at a very high sophisticated level. And so I cannot think of a single setting where an apprenticeship is not appropriate for that profession. I think now about a third of Americans have college degrees, about one third. And that's the right number. I don't think that the goal needs to be that we turn 100% of people into college degree holders. What I think we need to do is disabuse ourselves of this idea of college degree is inherently superior and apprenticeship is inherently lesser than. I think it's just about the nature of the job and what is most appropriate. In some jobs, an apprenticeship and a degree together make the most sense. In others, that are valid, that are equally important, an apprenticeship makes sense, but a degree doesn't add value, so why would we put it in there?
Yeah. And the element as well is that with degrees, you're kind of asking the young person to make a decision and make an investment decision that's going to cost a lot of money and time very, very early, and pick a pathway before they've even figured out, what degree or what profession or what even apprenticeship to take. How do we do that? I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's an ROI question for both the social level and then the individual level. I think there's also this moral question that we have to ask ourselves of the level of risk we are putting on individuals at the youngest, most vulnerable phase of their life, and how fair and appropriate that is, even when the ROI makes sense. So let's start with the ROI problem. An ROI has a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is the return, right? How much do we get in terms of wage increase, in terms of economic productivity? The denominator is how much did it cost us to get that? Oftentimes, we have seen both parts of that equation have runaway problem in the wrong direction, right? So now, in terms of the return, in the United States, over half of recent grads are either unemployed or underemployed in jobs that didn't require that college degree. There's no evidence that them going to college did anything to change their upward trajectory, because we allowed that college training program to take on a life of its own, as opposed to it being linked to clear productivity outcomes for them in their lifetime earnings. On the denominator, the cost of higher education and getting that training has also been run away. So you have all of these people who are experiencing almost no ROI, and sometimes even negative ROI, because now they have a ton of student loan debt. They're in a financially worse off position, and they will never make that back. And so I think there's, first of all, this question of, has higher ed decoupled itself from ROI in terms of social productivity and individuals' economic mobility? And then there's this second question, that moral residue question of, let's even say that we're only talking about programs that, produce consistent ROI. We've taken a look and seen the gains they get out of this relative to what it costs them to get there is worth it. There's still this moral question of, if we are going to require degrees to enter into a profession, why are we creating, especially at the price points that we're seeing today, what I would argue is basically the newest generation of indentured servitude? You come in and you will take on so much debt to get into this position that you'll spend the rest of your life working to pay off the debt just to enter table stakes in that economy. And we have a long history of rebuking things like indentured servitude, a long history of investing in things like public K-12 education, because it was necessary for the nature of our economy. I think the question for me is, why have we decided that if in the places where higher ed is necessary and the ROI does make sense, why are we allowing for such uncapped runaway costs that are borne largely, if not solely, by that individual who had to make that decision as an 18-year-old?
Yeah, and how does an 18-year-old know what to study, what profession to get into even, right? So you might think you want to be a lawyer, for example, right? And spend the next 3, 4, 5 years training and learning and studying to become that, and incurring a lot of debt, and then only to find that, oh, you hate this.
That's right.
And you switch.
That's right. And in the United States, we won't even let you drink alcohol until you're 21 years old. We don't think you're responsible enough for a beer. But if you want to go take out hundreds of thousands of dollars to go into debt over a profession you've never experienced before because you think you'll want to do it long term, that's a-okay. We'll let you do that. That is so backwards to me. And especially when you consider the fact that there's another way, right? These ideas of what I love about apprenticeship degrees and about apprenticeships in general is that there's no risk for anyone, right? So if we think about it, because the learner is contributing from day one, again, hopefully using something like agentic AI so that they're contributing at an even higher level. Yes, they're drawing a salary, but for the employer, they're drawing a salary for value that they're actually adding today. It might not be much, but they're adding some value, and we are paying them for that value they're adding. Meanwhile, for them, maybe it is only minimum wage and it's not very much money. But if I'm getting paid $20,000 a year to go to school, instead of paying $20,000 a year, and along the way, I'm experiencing what it's really like to work in this setting that I think I want to be in, there's sort of a no harm, no foul situation where if I get 2 years into this and decide I don't like it, I got paid along the way. I haven't taken on debt. I've gotten experience. And the employer has been doing that paying along the way because I've been adding value for them. But all of that hinges on this assumption that we embed that learner in real authentic learning from day one, and that we figure out how to do this in a cost-effective way. If college is costing what it costs here in the United States, some institutions are now over $100,000 a year to attend. There's no way in which the economics clear.
And they better be sure that $100,000 is what they actually want to do, right?
Exactly.
And hopefully give you an opportunity to experiment quite a bit before making that final decision. Okay, I've tried this profession, that profession, 5, 6, 7 different things. Oh, okay, I really do like law, right? I'm going to take on this debt. I'm going to train. I'm going to really be passionate about it rather than, do it because I was told to. My parents think it's a good idea. And so you mentioned, the young person coming in, maybe using agentic AI and doing the job. Don't people think that because of AI, it'll do it for us. Isn't there? I think there's a bit of an assumption there, right? That AI can actually do more than it actually can do.
Yeah.
That you can take it out of the loop.
That's right. I would say back to it. I think about how I use AI right now. It's really good at some things and really dumb, if not dangerous, at other things. It is, and I think that we will see significant growth, and everyone has this fear of, are we on the verge of super intelligence or something like that that will relevate human knowledge? The point at which that happens, that's not just coming for people early in the ladder. That's to our system, skilled labor everywhere. So that's a question that's sort of this extinction level event that we can sort of set aside. In the world in which we operate here today, where even what we call, reasoning models, we're seeing evidence from groups like Apple and others that it's actually not reasoning at all. AI is really, really good at putting mathematical predictions on what words should come next in its sequence based on the values that it has on millions and billions of data points out in the ecosystem. It is just parroting those things back to us. It is hallucinating sometimes. So it can parrot back mistruths. It can hallucinate even when we put in correct information. And so in any case, I think about it as a car. It is not a self-driving car. It is a car that still needs someone behind the wheel. It is still someone who needs gas and brakes and to be in control of what it's doing. And it makes that person much more powerful than someone who's trying to get somewhere on foot. But the idea that that car would be equipped to do anything without that behind the wheel is just in no way a reflection of where we are right now.
But I think it goes that a little bit because we live in the physical world, and there's a lot of physical context, human to human context, that just can't be replaced. Even if it could, it's probably not the best experience to be replaced by an AI. And a lot of that work is perhaps not very high level work that we can get an intern to come in and to use a lot of these tools, because even if as professionals, as experts, we can use the tools, maybe using those tools may not be the best use of our time. Having an intern to come in to use these agentic AI tools, there's enough in the middle of all these tasks that require someone to weave it together, to braid it together, right?
Absolutely. And
it doesn't require a PhD to do that. It can require, someone could apprentice to you to learn how you prompt things. Why do you do this and not that? But they can actually drive all these tools and manage the fleet of agents.
That's exactly right. And that's where, again, we're getting it wrong in training. For that person to be useful, right? If I'm going to become your apprentice, for me to be useful to you, I have to be capable of that weaving, of that fact checking, of that troubleshooting. And so schools should not be utilizing these tools, agentic or otherwise, cheating. They should not be calling them fraud. They should be calling them production of work. And they should be holding students accountable to, hey, what will you need to do to be valuable enough that David's going to want to hire you as his apprentice and bring you in? And we should be making you produce that for us here and now. And so you're exactly right. There is so much need for people with that skill set out in the economy, in those first rung positions. And what we would do well to do as educators is to embrace that and start training people to do that instead of exactly the opposite, calling it cheating and trying to beat it out at every turn.
Yeah, because I guess in college you write essays and produce a lot of assignments. That's important. And you might be able to use ChatGPT for a lot of that kind of work. But in industry, in business, for example, you have an essay, but the essay has to fit the context. So, in sales, for example, writing a proposal, I can use ChatGPT to write a proposal, but I get a student to do that. A student can write a proposal. I don't really know, how to fine-tune that proposal, to use an AI term, to make it fit the audience reading that. That you can only from an experienced sales professional to say, oh, look, that sounds too artificial. That sounds too, technical. This person isn't technical. This person likes this kind of thing. So change it this particular way, and the student can go back and quickly prompt a few things and produce a different draft, and along the way learn how to turn content and fine-tune it for audiences.
Absolutely. And think about this. In college, I'm usually given an essay topic weeks or months in advance, and I'm meant to go labor over it and just really pour into deep, massive production. That is not the cadence of the workforce at all. A lot of times they'll give you that feedback, and then you'll go meet with the client and they'll want the next version 24 hours later. And so it's not just about learning how to engage with these tools to become more productive. It's understanding that the being able to turn it around in a couple of hours. Right now, we think about as kids being slackers in college and procrastinating until the last minute.
Yeah.
In the workplace, we call that being expeditious and being efficient. And so how do we teach them not just to use those tools, but to embrace their potential to turn those new products in record time in ways that clients expect?
And that's, I hear the word, and I really dislike this term, soft skills, right? Being able to communicate, follow directions, manage time, prioritize. These kinds of skills are so important in the workplace. It is a contextual, physical, real world skills, but I don't get the sense that important, at least not assessed as such in this education system.
I think
right? It's more important to get the answer right in exam.
I think that's right. And I honestly, there's a phenomenon in the social sciences called the streetlight effect, right? And the story basically goes like this. If you see someone in the parking lot, it's late at night, and they're in the parking lot frantically looking under the streetlight for their keys because they've lost them, and without them, they can't get into their car and they can't go home. And so you, being the good Samaritan that you are, you sit down and you help them look everywhere under that streetlight, and you say, "Hey, I don't see any keys here. Are you sure this is where you dropped them?" And the person says, "Oh no, this isn't where I dropped them. I'm pretty sure I dropped them, 30 yards that way," and points off into this darker corner of the parking lot. I'm like, "Well, then why on earth are you looking for them here?" I'm like, "Well, because there's good light here, right? I can see here." And that's a well-documented, this is not just a joke by me, this is a well-documented phenomenon in the social sciences. And I think it's also a well-documented issue within education. We teach what we can measure, and that means that oftentimes what we're teaching are not the most enduring, important things. They're the things that we can assess because we as educators will be held accountable for assessment. So I can test how well you have memorized this series of facts. I can't necessarily test how thoughtful you are, or at least I don't know how to test for thoughtfulness, for some of the durable skills that you've mentioned around follow through and collaboration. And so I don't, but not because they're not more important, but because there's no good light there, right? Like I know my keys aren't this part, right? I know no one's going to care about if I can have my students regurgitate these facts down the road, but I focus there because there's good light there. I know how to assess it, and I know how to make sense of it. And I think that's the root issue.
Yeah. You worked on data system as part of Kraft Education, and I think that's super important because you're getting some very important dots. Can you go into a little bit more of that, because that's you're helping institutions be able to give credit for work experience, right?
Yes. Yeah. So our goal is
how'd you do that?
Yeah. So the first thing we do is what does Kraft replace? And we replace is pencil and paper, and then a whole mess of Google Sheets. So right now, if I am running a high school career and technical education program, or I am running a university clinical experience program, or I am running an apprenticeship program, right? Those are 3 different programs. In all of them, they require some component of experiential learning. I'm going out on the job and in a real world setting, learning how to do skills required for that job under the supervision of a qualified professional. Categorically, we use pencil and paper to track that has happened. And then we bring that data back to an administrator. That administrator manually enters it into some Google spreadsheet, and then uses that Google spreadsheet to manually copy and paste data into whatever compliance documents they need to award college credit and to get to award credit, high school, government, higher ed, or workforce, and then to get funding from the government for providing that training service. What Kraft does is replaces that pencil and paper. It's a free tool. and replaces an equally free tool of pencil and paper, but much more efficient in what it can do, which is you collect that data one time, and then we do a couple things with it. The first thing we do is we auto manage all of that compliance reporting for you. So let's say you're a CTE program, we can, yes, manage your CTE reporting. But maybe you're a CTE program that also wishes it was registered as an apprenticeship. We can now start managing your compliance to those other programs as well. So that's the first thing we do, is we manage reporting in a way that makes it easier to have, but also to together. The second thing we think about is how can we take that data and allow policymakers and other stakeholders to see insights that they've never seen before, right? So if we connect that skills data to, in the United States, we have something called the unemployment insurance system. It's basically where we collect wage data on every single worker in America who is is a full-time employee. And it's about 85% of the American workforce. And if we can connect that data with, anyone in the system of, hey, here's how Mallory got trained, here's how David got trained, here's their wage progression as a result, or here's their lack of wage progression, or hey, they're actually still on unemployment because they were never able to draw a job with those skills. We can start drawing insights around ROI and efficacy of different programs. So that's what Kraft does, is first it expedites compliance reporting for credits and for funding, but then it also uses the data that it collects in lieu of pencil and paper and plugs that into systems where it's never been connected before, so that any stakeholder, an employer, a government leader, a policy think tank, can start to make some new insights for themselves around working and what's not.
So I love that it's solving that street lamp problem that you mentioned before, right? There's only one street lamp before, so you see the light, so you assess that particular area. Now with data being visible, you're connecting all these dots. You're lighting up the whole. All right, so you can actually see where you actually drop your keys, and then you can actually build curriculum and go and find it, before you can't see it, you can't measure it, so you won't assess it, so you won't build those skills.
Absolutely. And I'll say we're an early with what we can do. I think of it as being the equivalent of, hey, before there was one parking lot that was miles wide and miles long and a single street lamp in the middle of it. And now we've put up like 4 or 5, but there are still
Your
dark
floodlights.
spots. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So eventually, where I genuinely believe we can get to, and again, this is perhaps because I'm an economist by trade and because I believe in data's ability to things. I do think eventually we'll have enough data points that we will have the equivalent of floodlights, where we will be able to proxy some of those durable skills that maybe we weren't able to directly assess. We'll be able to proxy them in massive amounts of data and start to actually make some of those assertions as well around which of those skills are being taught by which programs, how are they being measured and captured, and what are the outcomes we're getting to. That's the North Star. That's where I would love to get, where we can say with full certainty, this combination of skills is what gets us there. I also recognize that's a holy grail right now. That's an elusive quest, and we believe we can chase it down. But if we don't get there, but what we do along the way is put hundreds of regular power streetlights into this parking garage so that, it's still imperfect, but there's a lot less like blackout zone than there used to be.
Yeah.
That will still have been important progress made.
Essentially what you're saying is the more street lamps there are, the more things you can see, the more things you can measure. And because you can measure it, you can assess it. Because you can assess it, you can actually build some courses and curriculum around it, develop these skills. Now, the problem with soft skills or these durable skills, it's really hard to assess because there are no ways, very limited ways you can collect data around it and to assess it. So the holy grail is to try and figure out how to flood the area with light so you can actually understand how these data points interact and how these skills get developed and how you can actually continue to develop them and do what educators best. But it starts with providing the infrastructure to feed the assessment systems right kind of data to build new curriculum.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Now, just winding up our episode here because we have had wonderful far, but I'd like to ask us all, well, given this is an education-focused podcast, there's always been very important educators in our life, teachers in our life, the big impact that's got us where we are today. Could be a teacher, could be a mentor, or a coach. In your life, who's been a really impactful teacher and why?
Yeah, for me, actually, an actual teacher, but she was never my classroom teacher. She was my track and field coach. So when I was in high school, I had this incredible track and field coach who was also the English teacher at our school named Patty Lay. And Patty was the person who taught me how to work hard, even when you could get away with doing less. She was one of those people where, I've talked about this in some other places, but, my family's house burned down my freshman year of high school, and I was getting away with a lot as a result. I wouldn't turn in an assignment and people would be like, oh, it's okay, your family's going through a lot right now, etc. And Patty had no patience for that. Patty knew that there was no reason I couldn't be doing my homework and was really hard on me, marched me around and made sure that I was doing everything I was supposed to do on time when I was supposed to do it. And she only had to do it a few times in very early days in high school for me to learn that this was not someone who I was going to get away with playing games. But that completely changed my relationship to school and my relationship to my own work ethic, and had this really exponential trajectory. And I know that's true for me, but I also know that that is in many ways because of who Patty was. We were a big public school, nothing special about us. And in the 6 years that she was the head coach of that track and field program, 3 of us were the only Rhodes Scholars that school has ever had. But we were the 3 Rhodes Scholars that school has had, and we were all 4-year veterans of her track and field program. And I think all of us would say it was the same thing. You had someone like that who, to your point around these soft or durable skills, she never taught me English, but she taught me was an awful lot around work ethic, around exceptionalism, around follow through, around not making excuses. And I think those are skills that changed the trajectory of my life, but did the same for many other people in her program.
Amazing. Love stories like this. And the final segment of our show is a fun one. It's called Plugs. And this is an opportunity where you can actually plug an organization, an initiative, a thing maybe, or a person that you want to spotlight. Anything you want to plug?
There is a group that is working to become a new kind of university accreditor in the United States, and they've been at this for years. They are coming up on some big milestones where, becoming an accreditor is this very long and arduous process. And they've cleared a ton of hurdles and milestones and are now at a place where they're getting to start their initial accreditation process and really making inroads to becoming a new type of university accreditor. It's a group called the Post-Secondary Commission, the PSC, led by a guy named Stieg Leschly. And I have just been so impressed and excited because their focus is on meaningful connections to the workforce. It is on skill development, on gainful employment and return on investment for learners, or on workforce readiness. And I think just really challenges this assumption that you have liberal arts or workforce development, and is pushing for this new blended alternative of what higher education accreditation in the United States can be. And I've been a huge fan of theirs and they're getting ever closer to becoming one of the incumbents. So they're a group to watch called the Post-Secondary Commission.
Fantastic. Sounds really exciting and very timely too. We have to have new ways to accredit as well. So Post-Secondary Commission, you'll find the link in the show notes. And for me, I plug this show all the time. So if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, give me a rating, whatever good looks like. And that concludes our episode today. Thank you, Mallory. I love this conversation, and thank you for your time and sharing your insights. And we'll see you next time at Relearning Work.